What are some of our tack preferences on the Hashknife Ranch? When it comes to bridle, you prefer the headband or the ear band, tooling on your stuff, stirrup types. I know we talked about stirrups before. Um, Check that one out if anybody's interested. But what are some of your tack preferences, Dad?
Well, it's driven by what kind of animal you're on, really.
Or
I mean, I've
is it
ridden
a
a,
cow? Is it a horse?
oh yeah, there you go. Ostrich.
Yeah.
Um, I've ridden a lot of miles in a very light split ear type of uh headstall. And we tend to have a lot of just heavy, substantial leather, double stitched leather, because we're, at times on a lot of colts. And so I want something that's substantial, that they feel that you can get a hold of them if you have to, and it's not going to be light, not going to be rubbed off. Um, because they will do that. They'll try to
You
rub
and
something off if they get a little
you and
sweaty.
mom, you and mom bought me and Braden each a head stall for our horses, and more or less it's a finished head stall.
Yeah.
There's It's very easy, it's very thin, it's nice, and you know how many times I use it? Almost never, because it just feels uncomfortable to have something that thin. When you bring up the fact that everything's like double stitched, you're absolutely right. Like it doesn't feel natural because I'm not used to it.
Well, and that's because you haven't ridden a really finished horse with it in a while. I mean, you did your
Yeah,
horse, but he's old enough. He's kind of retired.
yeah.
And so when you get to a point where you have something that's going to be uh, well done, you're going to have a lot of miles on them, and they are very predictable. You can control them with your voice and your body instead of having to grab that headstall. You'll start using that again. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, it's not that it's double stitched, but it's very light leather. And you're right, it's more of a not necessarily for utility, but just a really nice, light, elegant looking, where you don't have a lot of headstall on a horse. So, and then I think I customized that by I made some very teeny tiny little branding irons
Hmm.
out of wire, and then I heated them up and then uh, burned both your brands on the very front of
Yep.
the brow band on those, so that
And they
you
look good
customize
too.
it. Yeah, they look pretty good. So it's just one of those things that it was a I believe those were Christmas presents one year, a
Hmm.
long ago.
Longer
And
ago, yeah.
but for the utility part of stuff, uh double and stitched, a little heavier leather, good substantial reins. It's hard to beat leather. I'm not one for There was a real craze there towards the, oh gosh, mid 80s, maybe into 70s, 80s. Biothane was a product. It's a petroleum product, looks kind of like shiny leather.
Hmm.
And, or also there's another one called pleather, kind of
Yeah.
kind of along the same lines. Um, and it was used because it's very durable, it's waterproof. A horse can sweat on it. Good in harness, good in uh, pack saddles, things like that, where you're going to have a lot of moisture, a lot of sweat. If you're in inclement weather, holds up nice, but it's not leather, and it's not strong like leather. When it fails, it fails catastrophically. It doesn't just stretch out a hole for a tongue in a buckle hole. It will tear and rip. And so I know a really well experienced, really good packer who he went to biothane on a few of his things and found out in a hurry. He's like, "Yep, yeah, no,
Not
forget
worth
it."
it. Yeah.
It's tough to beat good leather and cleaned and oiled and
So
properly.
that's kind of I like it. It's leather, kind of talking why we use it. Also, we touched on the headbands, but tooling. You have a pretty strong opinion of tooling, and we have a saddle called the Lady because of the tooling.
Yeah.
Kind of, I want to know your thoughts because there's some people that they like it absolutely just straight leather. There's no marks or scuffs or anything that's tooling wise. And then there's others that they want to have tooling all over that. They want to see the
Yeah.
the beautiful flowers or whatever you can within the seat of the saddle, within the cinch, like the latigos and stuff. That's the only thing that would be left to
Right.
not be tooled. But if they could, they would. So what's kind of your thought on the tooling aspect and anything other that I'm maybe missing?
Well, tooling is just that. It makes it a piece of art.
Yeah,
And kid that's about your age, a little older than you, that grew up, I know, I've known him since he was a little guy,
does some
is
great
a
stuff.
phenomenal leather maker. And
I want to have him on the channel one day if I can swing it.
if you can get 3 words out of him, that would be
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
we'll do it.
Uh,
We'll figure it
yeah,
out.
we'll figure it out. But builds a good saddle, builds a great saddle. Has ridden saddles. He's grew up doing that. And of course, part of his artistry, part of his what he's paid for, is his leather work. So from his standpoint, he's going to give the customer what they want. If I was to order a saddle from him, and I say this is what I want, that's what he would do, because
Yeah,
it's a custom saddle. But to build something and buy it, a lot of people like that. Here's the issue with it for me. To have really good leather work, well tooled, you tool deep into that leather and you create a lot of three-dimensional relief to it. Well, that three-dimensional relief also makes it not smooth. And so you can, rub your legs, rub your knees, inside of your thighs, your butt, if you have that seats tooled. And you'll notice most seats are not tooled. They are
right.
they are flat, they're smooth for a reason, and that is the reason. Well, you carry that to the rest of the saddle, and then you'll understand why, oh yeah, this is a little rough. The other part of that is anytime you got a crack, take a look at a bookshelf in your house. If you don't dust that for a while, what happens? It gets dirty. Same thing, and even on steroids with tooling on a saddle, it catches a lot of dirt. It'll catch mud. It'll catch sweat. It'll catch you name it, and deposit it in those cracks. So it's a little harder, or a lot harder to keep um, cleaner and free of any kind of that debris that will break down leather. I mean, dirt is hard on leather. So keeping it well cleaned, well oiled, and usable it's a significant amount of time to put into something to do that.
And I've seen some stuff like on Instagram, and I follow him on Instagram too. He does some great stuff. He shows his stuff off really well. But I've seen some others. I think it's just mostly competition things that they've been submitted for, you know, judging and all that. And there's some people that they tool the seat, but I think that's because it's probably never going to see the back of a horse.
Right.
But there's some people that they've said they've ridden in it and that tooling goes all the way up to the seat and just stops there and it'll get to the lower part of their thighs. And I'm just man, sitting on that all day or just riding a few hours, you'll start feeling that on the bottom part of your thighs, just above your knee, and you're gonna start considering whether or not you really want to keep riding that saddle.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of guys will win saddles and rodeos, or I mean, those are kind of the prizes. Instead of a big belt buckle, or in addition to a buckle, they've got a saddle. And if you really look at a lot of those saddles, they're not the highest quality. There are a lot of flowery, a lot of
Yeah.
uh, showmanship in it, and show some artistry. But most of them, and I'm not saying all of them, but most of them, they really aren't going to be used. You're right. So they don't have to be substantial in the infrastructure of the saddle like you would use for pushing a bunch of cows around or working on a horse every day.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit different. And yeah, they can carve things in a seat that's it's going to be for show.
I think you bring up two good points though, and I just want to reiterate them before moving on to the next part. But you talked about comfort, which is what we just finished with, but then the big thing is the maintenance of that saddle too. The fact that I think people don't think about it is the fact that the more relief and everything that there's you're exposing more leather to the elements and it can end up failing and getting messed up because of that.
Yeah, over time. Yeah, I mean, right away it's not going to be that bad, but it builds up and it does affect it later on. Uh, Cordura, there's a real craze there for a long time, and there still is some makers that will put Cordura, which is basically just a real heavy canvas. That's what they use instead of leather, and most of those are very inexpensive saddles. Doesn't mean that that saddle doesn't fit a horse, because I have seen some Cordura saddles teaching clinics that fit certain horses very well. It's like, okay, it works, but they're light, easy to throw around for kids and small women. So, but I just like leather, and the Cordura also will just like any kind of a material, it'll gather dust, dirt, and it'll just soak right into it. If you don't believe that'll happen, go out there and grab your saddle and then just smack it a few times
Yeah.
on that seat jockey or the stirrup leathers and watch the dirt fly out of that Cordura saddle. And we've had a couple of Cordura saddles. You guys had them when you were little kids. I think Braden actually won one time at
Yeah.
a show, and it was okay, but they weren't anything that you would really want to um, use. They were lightly built. They were for just that arena type work, or just riding for someone small. There's not a lot of stress being put on that saddle.
The last thing, and again, we talked about before, was the stirrup preferences, and not going too deep into it. We've only got about 4 minutes. Do your preferences for stirrups change when it comes from, everybody says a green colt to where you're just stepping up on them to like a finished horse that you've had on the ranch for years and anything in between? Or do you like to stick with the same stirrup? And is there like, what's the reason behind that?
Well, it depends more on the weather than it does depend on the animal, because there's a painting done of your great grandpa, my grandpa Wayne, that it shows him changing out stirrups, and I think the painting name was from Oxbow to Visalia, and what he was doing is he was just changing out his stirrups, going from a wintertime a big Oxbow stirrup that he could get his boot in,
Mm,
uh, to a Visalia in the springtime where you didn't need a overshoe or anything heavier on your feet. So that was more weather driven for us. If you're rough stocking a lot of horses, I guess you'd probably, maybe you would stick with an oxbow a little bit more. Honestly, I've got it's a Visalia style, leather covered. It's about an inch and a half, 2 inch wide platform on the bottom. Not much, but I like the consistency of my feet in a saddle as well as my butt. And I have several different saddles that I'll use depending on which horse I'm on. And I'll have 2 or 3 horses saddled at the same time. Well, you're not going to swap stirrups on all of those,
right.
and so they're wearing a saddle that fits them, and that I can either be doing groundwork with them and then step up onto them, or I'm out riding them and I can ride all of these saddles the same way. But I like to have that consistent same feel of a stirrup as well as the saddle all the time. So I don't normally change those stirrups out very often. If I did, it would be, if we're going to go in the backcountry and go hunting, and I needed some wide, big stirrups, then I might change them out. Otherwise,
Sure.
I stay pretty consistent.
Yeah. No, I agree. I didn't think about it, but I think without knowing that, I probably do the same thing just because, like you said, consistency of where your feet are, your butt is, you can find that same spot every time. So,
Yeah, changing a stirrup will change the length of your reach in your leg.
oh yeah, sure. I believe
So I
that.
mean, you have that to think about as well. So you just don't swap them out and everything's the same.
Yeah. Well, that's tack preferences from us, everything from a head stall to the saddle and down to the stirrup. So with that, we will take that conversation and put it out to pasture.